Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first class in neuroanesthesia titled Deterioration in GCS. This module contains the following: the introduction, the overview of causes of fall in the GCS. We will discuss a case scenario, followed by a discussion, and the summary and a conclusion. Now, coming to the definition of neurological deterioration. A decrease of 2 more points in the Glasgow-Coma scale, which measures the level of a patient's consciousness on a scale of 3 to 15, as described by Shirkova et al. In 2018. It can also be defined as the worsening of existing or occurrence of a new focal neurological deficit, which may be motor, sensory, or both. And the pupillary changes can serve as an indicator of the underlying cerebral insult. Now, there are two tools to assess the consciousness. One is the Glasgow-Coma scale, and the other is known as a 4 score. The Glasgow-Coma scale, as we all know, can be divided into 3 categories, which is eye-opening, the best verbal response, and the best motor response. Each given a score of 4 for eye-opening, 5 for best verbal response, and 6 for best motor response. If the patient opens his eyes spontaneously, he's given a score of 4. To speech, he's given a score of 3. To pain, 2. And if he has no response, he's given a score of 1. If the patient is oriented to time, place, and person, he is given a score of 5 on the verbal response scale. If he is confused, he's given a score of 4. If he has inappropriate words, he's given 3. Incomprehensible sounds, 2. And if there is no response, he's given a score of 1. If he obeys commands, he's given a score of 6. If he moves to localized pain, he's given a score of 5. If he has flexion withdrawal from pain, he's given a score of 4. If he has abdominal flexion, he's given a score of 3. And if he has abdominal extension, he's given a score of 2. The best response is when he achieves a score of 5. And if a person who's comatose is given a score of 8 or less. And if the patient is totally unresponsive, he is given a score of 3. The Glasgow-Coma scale was initially developed as a simple tool to grade consciousness in brain trauma. This is in order to remove the inter-observer variability during the neurological assessment. It is used for prognostic purposes and to follow up the patients clinically. However, the GCS considers the verbal response which is not possible in intubated patients. It also scores the best motor response, and it also fails to detect a sight deficit. Coming to the 4 score, it can be categorized into the following: eye response, motor response, brainstem reflexes, and respiration. An eye response of 4 is when the eyelids are open, tracking or blinking to command. A response of 3 is when the patient has eyelids open but not tracking. A response of 2 is when the eyelids are closed but open to loud voice. 1 is when the eyelids are closed but open to pain. And eye response of 0 is when the eyelids remain closed with pain. Motor response: a person with 4 is when he can do thumbs up, fist, or peace sign. 3 is when he is localizing to pain. 2 is when there's flexion response to pain. 1 is when there's extension response to pain. And 0 when there is no response to pain or generalized myoclonus status. Brainstem reflexes of 4 is when there is pupillary and corneal reflexes present. 3 is when there is one pupil wide and fixed. 2 is when pupillary or corneal reflexes are absent. And 1 is when pupillary and corneal reflexes are absent. 0 is when there is absent pupillary, corneal, and cough reflex. The 4th category is respiration, in which 4 is when the patient is not intubated and patient has a regular breathing pattern. 3 is when he is not intubated and has Cheyne-Stokes breathing pattern. 2 is when he is not intubated and has irregular patient breathing pattern. And 0 is when the patient is intubated and breathes at ventilator rate or apnea. 1 is when the patient is intubated but breathes above the ventricular rate. The 4 score is the abbreviation of 4 score And the expansion is the full outline of unresponsiveness. This is a 16-point scale as described previously, with scores ranging from 0 to 16. A person who is conscious oriented and obeying commands can be given a score of E4, M4, B4, and R4. This is the clinical grading scale for the assessment of patients with an impaired level of consciousness. It can be used for patients with or without the endotracheal tube. Patients may present in a variety of consciousness states. That is, the patient may be fully alert and aware and have some level of impairment, or patient may be completely unaware and unresponsive. A patient with a GCS score of less than 8 is considered to be neurologically compromised. This is a medical emergency which needs prompt diagnosis and medical management for a favorable patient outcome. So the neurological deterioration can occur due to a neurological problem or a neurosurgical problem at presentation to the hospital, or at any time during the course of treatment in the hospital. Coming to the pathological mechanism of fall in consciousness. There can be a structural cause of a decline in sensorium, including that causes focal pressure on the brain and ultimately blocking substrate delivery at a cellular level. For example, it can be trauma, either due to subdural or epidural hematoma, brain tumors, intracranial hemorrhage, hydrocephalus, or vascular occlusion. The non-structural causes can be divided, can be a substrate disruption at the cellular level due to toxic or metabolic etiologies. This can be due to exogenous toxins or due to a disruption of the metabolic milieu, either due to dysglycemia or sodium imbalance, which may present with symmetric or generalized examination findings. The underlying diagnosis and time of occurrence usually provides a clue to the etiology of the fall in the GCS. Coming to the perioperative causes. Preoperatively, the fall in consciousness may be due to the existence of a tumor, a hemorrhage into a tumor, a significant midline shift, a perilesional edema that is around the tumor or the hematoma, a mass effect of an intracranial space occupying lesion, and herniation of different types, a hydrocephalic attack, bleed or rebleed in an aneurysm. Intraoperatively, a fall in GCS may occur during awake clearotomy. This can indicate the occurrence of hemodynamic complications, such as persistent hypertension-induced cerebral hypoperfusion, hypertension-induced intracranial hematoma, venous artery embolism, cerebral venous sinus breach, and massive hemorrhage, or an airway obstruction, respiratory insufficiency-induced obtundation, intraoperative seizure, stroke, and postoperatively, the following may be the reasons. The neurosurgical complications such as postoperative hematoma, which may be subgaleal, epidural, subdural, or intraparenchymal. Cerebral ischemia, such as subarachnoid hemorrhage, vasospasm, vessel occlusion. A brain swelling, such as an edema, vasodilatation. Infection may be due to meningitis, or subdural empyema, and cerebral abscess. And seizures, which may be due to infection, depressed compound skull fracture, cortical lesions, and hydrocephalus, which may be due to obstruction or resorption, tension pneumocephalus, cerebrospinal fluid fistula, inverse cerebral herniation, or cranial nerve lesions. There are non-neurological perioperative causes, which may be due to metabolic causes, such as sodium imbalances, temperature and glycemia, hyponatremia-induced cerebral edema, hypernatremia-induced seizures, hypo and hyperthermia, hypo and hyperglycemia should be looked for. Systemic, such as persistent hypertension from cardiac disorders compromising cardiac output, which can be primary or due to neurogenic stress myocardium. Hypoxia from primary lung pathology and neurogenic pulmonary edema. Infective, such as from a systemic source causing sepsis and cerebral sources, such as cerebral abscess and empyema. Coming to the case report. Mrs. H, a 70-year-old female patient, was brought to the emergency with a history of seizures and a fall at home at 8:30 a.m. on 15 June 2020. She remained in orderly sensorium after the GTCS episode when she was brought to the casualty at 1:50 p.m. on the 15th of June 2020. The history of presenting illness. The patient was apparently normal when she came with a history of fall at home. She had generalized tonic-clonic seizures, which was followed by a loss of consciousness for 10 minutes. When she was brought to the emergency, she had altered sensorium. She was opening her eyes to pain and was speaking inappropriately. Her GCS was E2V3M5. History of presenting illness. There was no history of headache and vomiting. There was no history of vertigo, tinnitus, decreased hearing, or gait imbalance. There was no history of fever, neck stiffness, neck pain, or drowsiness. There was no history of decreased sensation over the face or dripping of saliva from the angle of the mouth. There was no history of difficulty in swallowing or nasal regurgitation of fluids. There was no history of limb weakness or tremors. There was no history of memory deficits, slurring of speech, dysarthria, clumsiness while performing daily activities. Her personal history, her sleep was normal and her bowel and bladder habits were regular. Coming to her past history, she was a known case of hypertension on telmisartan 40 milligrams once a day for 5 years. She was also a known case of hypothyroidism on tablet Thyronorm 75 microgram for 3 years. In examination, the patient was drowsy and not oriented in time, place, and person. She was obese and had a short neck. She was well built and nourished. Her blood pressure was 144 by 98 millimeters of mercury. Her heart rate was 68 per minute. Her oxygen saturation was 90% on room air and 98% on oxygen flow by mask at the rate of 4 liters per minute. Her GCS was E2V3M5. Her pupils were bilaterally equal reacting to light and moving all 4 limbs against gravity. She displayed no limb weakness. Her sensory and motor system was normal. Systemic examination, her respiratory system had showed bilateral normal vesicular breath sounds. Her cardiovascular system showed first and second sound and no murmurs. Her CT brain was done, which showed diffuse thick subarachnoid hemorrhage involving bilateral sylvian fissures, anterior interhemispheric fissure and basal cistern. There was right sylvian and right gyrus rectus anterior interhemispheric hematoma present. She had an MS score of 3. A CTA angiography showed in the evidence of anterior communicating artery aneurysm with filling of the aneurysm from the left internal carotid artery. A1 segment of right anterior carotid cerebral artery was hyperplastic. The DSA was suggestive of saccular multilobed anterior communicating artery aneurysm of size 4.2 into 4.0 millimeters with a neck size of 3.0 millimeters. The dome was directed anterior superiorly and the aneurysm is filling from the left ICA injection with the right A1 ACA hyperplastic. So the impression was the subarachnoid hemorrhage due to anterior communicating artery rupture, World Federation of Neurological Society, grade 4. Coming to our blood investigations, our hemoglobin was 8.8, our sodium was 129.3, which increased the next day to a level of 134 millimoles per liter. Our T3 was 66.64, T4 was 66.24, and TSH was 7.71. The ECG showed T-wave inversion and echocardiogram showed mild concentric left ventricular hypertrophy, grade 1 left ventricular diastolic dysfunction, and an ejection fraction of 60%. The chest X-ray and high-resolution CT chest show the following. There was mild bilateral pleural effusion seen, mild pericardial effusion. The rest of the lung parenchyma appeared normal. The trachea and major bronchi were normal and coarse in caliber, and there was no evidence of any luminal filling defects. Mediastinal vascular structures were normal, and there was no significant mediastinal lymph node seen, and no mediastinal mass lesion noted. So the possible non-neurological causes for fall in the GCS can be attributed to aneurysm-induced subarachnoid hemorrhage with hyponatremia. So both of these were treated during the course of a hospital stay. On the 16th of June 2020, she underwent left terraneal craniotomy and clipping of the anterior communicating artery aneurysm. Intraoperatively, she was hemodynamically stable. There was no brain bulge. There was no significant blood loss. 1 pint of Paxils or B-positive blood group was given intraoperatively. Post-operatively, her pupils were 2 millimeters sluggishly reacting. There were no hemodynamic fluctuations or oxygen desaturations intraoperatively. Postoperatively, immediately she was E1M5VT in sensorium. Her pupils were bilaterally 2 millimeters sluggishly reacting, and she was moving all four limbs against gravity. She was shifted to the ICU for ventilating support and further care. The COVID test came negative, and she was E3VTM5 while shifting to the ICU. Her postoperative CT brain showed a right inferior frontal hematoma, diffuse SAH, and aneurysmal clip in place. Coming to the postoperative sequelae, following the surgery on the first postoperative day, the patient had a fall in GCS. Her GCS was E1VTM3, and her pupils remained 2 millimeters with sluggish reaction to light. Coming to the non-structural causes of the fall in GCS postoperatively, hyponatremia is a cause because her sodium was 130 millimoles per liter. She had anemia with a hemoglobin of 9 grams %. Both were identified and treated. What could be the mechanisms of brain injury after the subarachnoid hemorrhage? Mechanical causes, there could be arterial constriction, blood in the cistern, or hydrocephalus. There can be physiological causes, which is raised ICP, reduced cerebral perfusion pressure or reduced cerebral blood flow, and impaired cerebral autoregulation, and vasoconstriction, which can either be macrovascular or microvascular. Ionic causes, which can be due to cortical spreading depression, impaired calcium homeostasis, calcium influx, potassium influx, and hypomagnesemia. Inflammatory causes, such as nitric oxide or nitric oxide synthase activation, endothelin-1 release, oxidative stress, and platelet activation. And causes due to cell death of endothelial cells, neurons, and astrocytes. Coming to the discussion. There's acute impairment of cerebral autoregulation, which is seen as a consequence of initial aneurysmal rupture. Inflammation and oxidative stress is the other reason for brain injury. There can be early activation of inflammatory pathways after aneurysmal rupture, and this may be responsible for reactions that cause a release of pro-inflammatory and vasoactive factors. All of these correlate with acute delayed cerebral ischemia and poor outcome. Another reason for the fall in GCS is cortical spreading depression. This may contribute to delayed cerebral ischemia. It can be described as depolarization wave in the cerebral gray matter that propagates across the brain at 2 to 5 millimeters per minute and results in the depression of evoked and spontaneous EEG activity. The coagulation cascade is activated early after the aneurysmal rupture and occurs before the onset of delayed cerebral ischemia. This is an early predictor of cerebral infarction. The elevated levels of fibrin degradation products and D-dimer in the CSF of patients after subarachnoid hemorrhage are associated with delayed cerebral ischemia, cerebral infarction, and poor outcome. A prospective study using transcranial Doppler showed that microembolic signals were present in 70% of SAH patients with delayed cerebral ischemia. Microthrombosis also correlated with the amount of overlying free subarachnoid blood and clinical and pathological signs of ischemia. Hypomagnesemia occurs in more than 50% of patients with subarachnoid hemorrhage. Hypomagnesemia should be corrected in order to reduce the rate and frequency of cortical spreading depolarization. So the common reason for this patient who had the fall in GCS postoperatively, because she's a case of cerebral aneurysm, is cerebral vasospasm. So this patient was investigated for the same. Cerebral vasospasm may be due to an inflammatory process which is caused due to oxidized hemoglobin degradation products. It occurs between 3 to 14 days of aneurysmal rupture, and it is a major cause for delayed clinical deterioration. The diagnosis of cerebral vasospasm should be considered after other causes such as aneurysmal rebleeding, seizures, hydrocephalus, infection, hypertension, cardiopulmonary dysfunction, infection, and hyponatremia are ruled out. So in order to treat the vasospasm, one must monitor and detect perfusion abnormalities. once other factors such as temperature, oxygen saturation, electrolyte balance are under proper control. One must also treat intracranial hypertension, hydrocephalus, and cerebral edema due to inflammation before addressing the vasospasm. So once you suspect a patient to have cerebral vasospasm, we will have to clinically assess the patient. Check if the patient is sedated. The digital subtraction angiography is the gold standard for diagnosing cerebral vasospasm. A CT angiography, a daily transcranial Doppler, a CT perfusion MRI SPECT or PET, and a post-operative check angiogram. A post-operative check angiogram here showed no residual aneurysm with mild to moderate spasm of the left M1, M2, A1, and A2 segments, and the right A2 segments of the anterior cerebral artery. This is an image of the nimodipine flush post-surgery. She underwent intraarterial nimodipine flush for 6 days, and milridone infusion was started at 7 ml per hour. Coming to the post-operative course, the patient was on pressure support ventilation in the emergency ICU. She was extubated on the 8th post-operative day. She was E4, V5, M6 at the time of discharge and was discharged with the following medication. Tablet nimodipine 60 mg, Futali for 10 days after discharge. Tablet ranitidine 50 mg BD. Tablet Levipil 500 mg BD. Tablet tolvaptan 7.5 mg BD. Tablet thyroxine 100 microgram OD and advised endocrinology opinion. The intraoperative monitoring that can be used to detect, to monitor her were the EEG, the near infrared spectroscopy, the electrocorticography, SSEP and MEP, and the intraoperative MRI guidance and neuronavigation. It is important to foresee, to minimize, and to avert a fall in GCS postoperatively with these monitoring equipment. Coming to the bedside monitoring for neurological deterioration. The transcranial Doppler. It can be used to diagnose the following. When the mean flow velocity of the middle cerebral artery is greater than 120 centimeters per second, the Lengard ratio greater than 3, a pulsatility index greater than 0.8, and a resistance index greater than 0.5 correlate with poorer outcomes. A hyperemia would result in flow elevations in both the MCA and ICA and result in a Lengard ratio of less than 3. Whereas vasospasm would preferentially elevate the MCA flow over the ICA with Lengard ratio greater than 6. The Lengard ratio between 3 and 6 is a sign of mild vasospasm, and greater than 6 is an indication of severe vasospasm. A vascular insufficiency can lead to energy depletions. This can lead to electrical alterations. The EEG can be used for continuous bedside monitoring in subarachnoid hemorrhage patients. It includes scalp EEG. The parameters analyzed are fast over low activity, that is the alpha over delta. Delayed cortical ischemia is likely to be seen in patients with an alpha to delta ratio more than 50% below baseline. The variability of relative alpha, the post-stimulation alpha to delta ratio, the mean amplitudes, suppression percent, and the trend analysis of total power. The near-infrared spectroscopy. This measures changes in the deoxyhemoglobin concentration in the cortical vessels. During cerebral vasospasm, NIRS detects decrease in cortical oxygen saturation, total hemoglobin, and oxyhemoglobin. And a fall more by greater than 20% from baseline is detected. Microdialysis. Here, an intracerebral microcatheter probes samples parenchymal extracellular glucose, lactate, pyruvate, glutamate, glycerol concentration, and other metabolic parameters such as partial pressure of oxygen, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, pH, and temperature. This allows the detection of potentially salvageable brain tissue and predicts delayed cerebral ischemia with high specificity but low sensitivity. Jugular blood sampling. The increase in SgO2 and decrease in the AgDO2 indicates that the blood supply exceeds the metabolic demand. This is significant of hyperemia. A cerebral ischemia is defined as the jugular venous oxygen saturation of less than 55% And cerebral hyperemia is defined as the jugular venous oxygen saturation of greater than 75%. Coming to the pathology-related causes for neurological deterioration. This can be to ischemic stroke, intracranial hemorrhage, or due to the effect of supratentorial tumor surgeries. Ischemic stroke. Early neurological deterioration can occur, which is defined as the clinical worsening or recurrence during the first 72 hours after ischemic stroke. The incidence is between 13 to 37% of all ischemic strokes and is associated with a worse functional outcome. The causes of early neurological deterioration are related to the pathophysiology of ischemic strokes. The mechanisms of early neurological deterioration. This can be due to a failure of collateral circulation in a patient with critical stenosis or occlusion of a large vessel, which may either be intra or extracranial. There can be progression of thrombosis with a consequential increase in the ischemic area. There can be early recurrence, especially in atherothrombotic strokes. There can be development of cerebral edema in patients with large strokes. And finally, hemorrhagic transformation in patients treated with fibrinolytic drugs. Late neurological deterioration. This is generally due to systemic causes like infections, metabolic disorders, or other vascular complications. The pathophysiological mechanisms that can produce early neurological deterioration may vary between patients, and sometimes it is not possible to establish a specific cause. Intracranial hemorrhage. In patients with intracranial hemorrhage, the cerebral causes of neurological deterioration can occur as primary presentation. This can be due to perihematomal edema or associated intravesical hemorrhage or hydrocephalus, infections such as sepsis, and toxins or drugs. In case of supratentorial tumor surgeries, the fallen GCS can be attributed to either intracranial causes or systemic causes. When it's intracranial, it can be due to increased intracranial pressure, due to midline shift due to tearing of cerebral vessels, herniation which may be transtentorial, transforamen magnum, or transkraniotomy. It can be due to epilepsy or vasospasm. And systemic such as hypercapnia, hypoxia, hypotension or hypertension, hypoosmolality or hyperosmolality, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, low cardiac output, and hyperthermia. Delayed recovery after neurological surgeries. This can occur due to midline shift, a pin-site hematoma, a pneumocephalus, or peritumoral edema. How would you treat an intracranial hypertension? One would try to prevent it occurring in the first place. One would have to maintain euvolemia, give adequate sedation, analgesia, and anxiolysis, place the patient in the head-up position, and avoid jugular venous compression, administer osmotic agents such as mannitol and hypertonic sterline, administer beta blockers such as esvelol at the dose of 0.5 to 1 milligram per kg IV, administer clonidine or dexmedetomidine, can administer lignocaine at the dose of 1.5 milligram per kg IV. One can give steroids in case of tumors. One should maintain adequate mean arterial pressure, central venous pressure, pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, and heart rate. One should maintain adequate ventilation, keeping a partial pressure of oxygen greater than 100 millimeters of mercury and partial pressure of carbon dioxide of around 35 millimeters of mercury. Keep the intrathoracic pressure as low as possible. Hyperventilation on demand before induction, and use of IV agents infusion in case of a TENS sprain. In case of infratentorial surgeries, there can be a hydrocephalic attack or a venous embolism. In case a patient has a venous embolism, the intraoperative goals are to inform the surgeon immediately to discontinue nitrous oxide and increase oxygen flows, modify the anesthetic, have the surgeon flood the surgical field with fluids, provide jugular vein compression, aspirate the right atrial catheter, provide cardiovascular support, and change the patient's position. The postoperative goals is to provide supplemental oxygen, perform electrocardiography, chest radiographs, measure serial arterial blood gas levels, And if arterial air embolia is suspected, provide hyperbaric oxygen compression if available. If a patient, in a patient who has an aneurysm, the following complications may occur. Rebleeding. This occurs at a statistic of about 11%. It occurs in the first 24 hours, and it is eliminated by early surgery. It can be treated by antifibrin or lytic agents and calcium channel blockers. And patient develops vasospasm. It is responsible for 13.5% of major mortality and morbidity. And on the DSC, 50% have spasm. Half of them are clinically significant and half of them will die or have severe disability. The irritant for this is oxyhemoglobin, and on the CT it shows hypodensity. The vasospasm occurs at around 72 hours post-surgery. It peaks at 7 days and resolves about 2 weeks. Patient can present with decreased consciousness, new onset focal signs. It can be predicted by transcranial Doppler. The nimodipine reduces vasospasm by 40 to 70%. It works at distal vessels or cellular level. A patient with a cleft aneurysm, one should target a blood pressure of 160 to 200 millimeters of mercury. If a patient has an unsecured aneurysm, target the blood pressure of 120 to 160 millimeters of mercury and maintain the hemolytic rate at 33%. In case of an aneurysmal rupture, this occurs in large arteries such as the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, the anterior communicating artery, posterior communicating artery. It is associated with high mortality and morbidity, and it occurs after applying temporary clips. So the treatment is to apply temporary clips. It is important to maintain the vitals, and the mean arterial pressure is brought to 50 or less for surgical control. Propofol or etomidate is used, and there needs to be aggressive fluid and blood transfusion. And on temporary clip application, normal tension is to be maintained. In the case of AV malformation surgeries, the neurological deterioration may be due to the following causes. A patient may develop hemorrhage, and the surgical cause may be a hemorrhage directly from the AV malformation and nidal dissection, premature occlusion of the draining veins. Patient may present with hemorrhage and the AVMs with ragged borders and intermixed brain. The anesthetic management is to replace the volume and the blood to maintain the mean arterial pressure to correct coagulation abnormalities. In case of an intraparenchymal injury, this can occur due to a surgical cause, which may be due to circumferential dissection during the nidus dissection, the transecting arterial feeders too far from the nidus, excessive retraction, bridging vein injury, and the hemorrhage can escape into white matter attacks and cause deficits. The preoperative imaging with the functional MRI more precisely locates the neurological function. The unexpected brain swelling during a long case may be indication of an evolving stroke. And the treatment is to hyperventilate and to give mannitol and to manage a tight PP control. Coming to the postoperative complications. Complications such as hemorrhage may be due to a residual nidus or inadequate hemostasis. The anesthetic management is transfusion. Seizures, the patient may be required to be put on 6-month antiepileptic treatment post-resection. Normal perfusion pressure breakthrough, which may be due to cerebral edema, hemorrhage, or both. The surgical cause is a Steele phenomenon, during which a large, long, high-flow feeding arteries that divert the blood flow from the surrounding parenchyma. Retrograde feeding artery thrombosis, in which the feeding artery stasis can be seen up to 1 month. Retrograde venous thrombosis, in which there's venous stresses in large draining veins. And vasospasm, which is rare, is caused due to extensive dissection. The neurodegeneration after the neuroimaging and interventional radiology procedures may be due to the following. Hemorrhage, and the management is an abrupt rise in mean arterial pressure. Due to an aneurysmal perforation, one should immediately reverse the heparin with 1 milligram of protamine for every 100 units of unfractionated heparin. In a case of intracranial vessel injury or dissection, you lower the systolic blood pressure, maintain normocapnia, and administer mannitol 0.25 to 0.5 milligram per kg and insert an external ventricular drain. In a case of occlusive, you will have to focus on raising the mean arterial pressure to promote the collateral blood flow and to maintain normocapnia. In thromboembolic complications, you may need to use thrombolytic agents intraarterially. And due to a displacement of coil into the parent vessel to the coil fracture, you can attempt to retrieve the coil or to do a craniotomy. And in the case of vasospasm, you need to give hypertensive therapy such as dopamine and noradrenaline. Administer papaverine intraarterially. The few complications which are transient are monocular blindness, seizure, transient increase in intracranial pressure, hypertension, tachycardia, paradoxical worsening of vasospasm. An angioplasty, and which is effective and which is done within 2 hours of ischemia. In case a patient has perioperative seizures, it may be due to free radical generation from extravascular leakage of blood components. There can be disturbances of ion balance across cell membranes due to ischemia or hypoxia. Amongst the recommendations to administer anti-epileptic drugs, it occurs in patients with previous history of epilepsy, in patients who have considerable cerebral damage. It should be started before surgery in high-risk patients. There should be termination of anti-epileptic agents several months to 2 years. In case the patient has anti-epileptic termination of anti-epileptic drugs. Most antiepileptics have a neuroprotective action, and the conventional antiepileptics are effective in preventing perioperative seizures. So to summarize, the patients presenting to the neurocritical care units usually have structural causes like traumatic brain injury, intracranial hemorrhage, brain tumors, hydrocephalus, or a metabolic cause such as hyponatremia. The neurological worsening may result from sepsis, meningitis, and seizures. So to approach a patient with neurological deterioration, you will have to do a rapid diagnostic panel. You assess the cardiovascular, hemodynamic, and respiratory status. That is the heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, temperature, arterial blood gas analysis. Do a neurological assessment, that is assess the GCS, the pupils, and the new onset neurological deficits. Do imaging such as CT imaging and angiography. And manage the patient with airway, breathing, circulation, disability, and exposure, assessing whether the patient has hypothermia and to treat the specific cause. To conclude, early detection of neurological deterioration contributes to successful intervention in favorable patient outcomes. So you have to ensure that you treat the patient's signs and symptoms promptly, increase the frequency of observation, identify the cause of deterioration, correct any metabolic and electrolyte imbalances, and support the patient's hemodynamic status. Thank you.